Hi, everybody. Bryan Norcross here, and good Tuesday afternoon to you. This is another edition of our live streaming HQ&A. It's kind of tricky, isn't it? Hurricane HQ&A, Q&A meaning that you can interact, and this is a special edition because Deputy Director of the National Hurricane Center, Jamie Rome, is with us. Jamie is also storm surge specialist. The things that we talk about in storm surge and storm surge forecasts and watches and warnings, that was really a product of Jamie's imagination. So we're going to talk about that. Jamie, thanks for coming on. You're old enough to remember back when we used to put phone numbers up on TV and people would call in and ask questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, now people barely use the phone, so that's not going to work. If people want to interact with us, they interact with us on Facebook or YouTube or TikTok. We're live on TikTok right now, or LinkedIn or Instagram or X. We're live on all of those. So this is the new way to do it. So we appreciate your coming on and trying all this out brand new this season with us.
No, thanks for having us. It's an important new way to get the message out. And for a storm like this, which is offshore, making sure people understand that this is pretty significant is important.
Yeah, it's complicated because we all and most people, I think, look at the wind speed as a gauge on how bad the storm is going to be. And in this case, the wind speed is not especially relevant. That's what our message has been. How would you characterize it?
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky storm because it's going to be a big storm surge and coastal erosion and wave impacts along the Outer Banks and portions to the north as well.
Mhm.
And a lot of people sort of gauge their awareness on traditional metrics like the Saffir-Simpson scale, or whether the cone is sort of pointed at them, or those types of
Mhm.
you know anchors, if you will. And in a storm like this, it's going to track a little bit offshore. It can be hard for people to decipher. The other things, the Outer Banks are just very, very, very vulnerable. They're flooding today with the high tide right now. We're looking at the webcams and they're flooding. I mean, look how far they are from the storm. The wind hasn't even come up. The biggest of the waves haven't even arrived, and they're already flooding in spots today.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at it. Let's look at the graphics here, and then we'll get to the questions. We already have some questions in from viewers. So here we are with the current 2 o'clock advisory is the last one we have. 105 miles per hour was the estimate, and Richard Pash, who did that advisory, a senior hurricane specialist, said that might even be generous, but maybe not looking at the developments with the storm even since 2 o'clock. North-northwest at 10, so it's picking up forward speed. When it was slowing down, that might have been churning up some cool water. Pressure going down, an indication that maybe there is still some more life left in it. Look at the thunderstorms blowing up here, kind of an interesting looking curve to them. It would be wonderful to have hurricane hunters in there right now, but they'll be in there a little bit later on, and we'll see exactly what's going on. But when they were there before, the strongest winds were well displaced from where the center is. The center was over here, and the strongest winds were way up here. But this whole area on this side of the storm had reasonably strong winds. But now we see it blowing up over top of what we think is probably the center. We'll get Jamie's thoughts on that here in just a second. He's an old forecaster here, but the center, to my eye, is somewhere right up in here now, and thunderstorms seem to be near and around that. So to me, this is a sign that we might have some re-intensification, certainly reorganization going on. Okay, here's the forecast from the Hurricane Center, and you see that they are forecasting it to intensify slightly. Remember, it's 105 now, so tomorrow evening into Thursday morning, when it's in this area, maybe up to 110. Some models even take it a little stronger than that. It's still over warm water. The atmospheric conditions appear like they might get better. The factors that were diminishing it seem to be going to let up. We'll see if that indeed happens. And this is the time period in here when it's going to put the maximum pressure on Cape Hatteras. So this is not a good combination of events. And then it begins to move offshore as it gets picked up in strong westerly winds and diminishes, but still big effects. It grows in size, so big effects in the ocean. Here you can see it grow in size. Watch this. The yellow areas, that's the tropical storm force winds, 40 miles per hour and higher. There's the hurricane force winds in here, hurricane force gusts in there. Watch as it goes forward in time, expands. And it's just like in the bathtub. You move the water with your hand. You move so much, you move it with your whole arm. You move a lot more. The bigger the storm, the more water gets moving. Therefore, the more effects at the coast. The bigger the waves, the more storm surge you generate, and so forth. And we'll try and distinguish between all those different factors here in just a moment. But there you see Thursday morning, you get this northeast wind coming in here like this, but they're really going to know it along the Cape, maybe up into the Tidewater of Virginia as well. So tropical storm warnings mean tropical storm winds should be expected, 40 miles per hour or higher sustained from Duck on down to just below Cape Lookout on Cape Hatteras. And then a watch means be ready for them, possible up into the Tidewater of Virginia Beach, for example. This is really a coastal event. And then storm surge warnings. This is Jamie's thing here from Duck, which is on the northern side of the Cape Hatteras area, down to about Cape Lookout. Storm surge warning means at least 3 feet above normal high tide is where the water starts, and then waves on top of that. In this case, the forecast is for 4 feet above normal high tide there. So stand at the high tide line on the beach, imagine 4 feet on your body. That's where the water starts. And then the big waves come in on top of that, big wave generated by this energy coming out of this hurricane. And then up to 3 feet farther north, and then also in the sound here, 2 to 3 feet, and then down here all the way down to Myrtle Beach up to 3 feet. So a lot of water rise in that part of the coast, and then big waves elsewhere on the coast. And again, we'll talk about that with Jamie here in a second. All right, so here's what's happening. Here is the energy that the hurricane is putting in the ocean. Notice these numbers way up here in the 30s, 30 feet of waves. Now, these are the waves offshore, so you can imagine a cruise ship going over these big waves or some kind of ship. There's those kind of waves, and the energy is radiating out of the hurricane, and you see it in the reds here, creating not so big a waves, but still significant waves to the north. Here we are tomorrow morning. Watch as we go forward in time. Here it comes up, and this energy is coming up to the southeast coast, all the way from the Treasure Coast in Florida up to Cape Hatteras. They're all along that coast getting that energy in the waves. If you've never been in the surf and you're real, it's dangerous, but boy, you can feel it. You can feel it in the undertow. And having surfed a hurricane one time, it was really scary because I lost my board, and the currents were just stunningly spectacular with this extra energy in the ocean. Then it moves north, and here we are with the peak effects late Wednesday into early Thursday in North Carolina and around Cape Hatteras up in the Tidewater, and then moving north. And look at this, all the way from New England all the way down to Cape Hatteras. So this is Thursday evening, and then it kind of moves ashore or offshore, but still lots of energy in the ocean all the way into the weekend. So, Jamie, before we get to the questions, talk about the difference in these various ocean effects, because you have just plain old water rise. We've seen a lot of video now over the last few years of storm surge. The ocean or the Gulf or whatever is just high, and then waves happen on top of that. But then you also have the more energetic than normal wave action, right? Which can do obviously big damage to beaches and to homes along the beach and so forth. How are those phenomena different or related?
This is a great question, and you know, a lot of people want to know why a storm surge warning was issued in this case. And one of the contributing factors was this wave energy that you talked about, because it can create, even in relatively shallow water. Let's say the water is only a foot or two above land, like in a parking lot or under a home. If it's rushing in with all that breaking wave energy, it takes on a level of danger that is above and beyond the depth. So the depth alone is not always the determinant in an outcome of a storm, and it's certainly a factor that we considered the extreme wave energy. as you would talk about. So when all that wave energy strikes the coast, the repeated pounding of waves over and over and over again over the course of time raise the water level itself, meaning the waves alone raise the water level. And you can convince yourself of that by just looking at the fact that it's flooding on Hatteras now, well before any winds come up. So no storm surge. It's just that wave energy, striking the coast and raising the water level. And then you have the storm, when it makes its closest point of approach on Wednesday and Thursday, and that's the more traditional storm surge that we are used to. The wind is being pushing the ocean towards land. Those two are going to combine to create really nasty conditions. And one of the determinants we use the storm surge warning for is a situation where maybe evacuations might be called or necessary, right? So and you saw the evacuations that have gone out. The reason for those are often those communities get cut off or roads become impassable, like 12. If you're not familiar with North Carolina 12, that road will become impassable at certain times during the storm, and possibly for beyond the storm duration if sand is deposited on the road. So when a community becomes cut off like that, it takes on a whole new level of severity.
Yeah, you don't want to have people stranded if something happens to them, an ambulance can't get to them or whatever, they can't get help. All right, Jordan Overton is at Fox Weather headquarters in New York, and he's controlling us here, and he's taking in the questions. So Jordan, go ahead and let's see what people are asking, and I'll contribute over. Let's see, but Jamie will have most of the answers, I'm sure. Go ahead.
We've got people from over here watching. We've got some people from Georgia checking in. A couple people from Florida checking in. A question we're getting from our TikTok audience that I think is very unique to what you guys were just talking about. We talk about how, like we said, the storm surge would be 4 feet. But the question was, but there's tide cycles, the water goes up and down, it's moving around. What does 4 feet mean? Like, what is the person supposed to understand when they see 4 feet forecast of storm surge?
All right, Jamie, it's not like you've never heard this question before. Go ahead.
It's actually a really good question.
It is a good question. It's a great question.
So the easiest way to describe the 4 feet is if you went to the shoreline and you found the high tide line. So if you went and like looked at where the edge of the water is at precisely high tide, or sometimes on the bay side you can see the markings on like seawalls or pilings. You can see where the water normally comes to at high tide, and so that's like a mean high tide, like our average high tide. The water gets to this line, though 4 feet is above that. Right, so it's above that. So you can, certainly don't go to the shoreline during a storm to do this exercise. But that's basically what it means. And people who live near the beach and boat, trust me, I'm a boater. I know where the high tide line is. And people who live at the coastline, they know where the high tide line is. They know where the water comes to on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day. So it's a way to communicate to them, this is how far above that sort of normal, if you will, the water will rise.
And that's kind of the baseline of the water, right? The waves are on top of that. So that doesn't count any kind of wave action. As a matter of fact, when you measure the storm surge, you go to a lot of trouble to discount the waves to figure out what that kind of base level is.
Right. Yeah, we call that stilling or still water.
Right. Like in closets or inside of buildings, for example. All right, Jordan?
All right, yeah, so the next question is coming in from North Carolina, the Outer Banks. I have a lot of questions from there, obviously. The question is, with central North Carolina getting the wind, will there be any rain bands with how close Aaron is approaching? What are the exact impacts there?
I think this is really a coastal event, wouldn't you say, Jamie? I mean, in central North Carolina, they may be behind the cold front. As a matter of fact, this is kind of a jamming up against the front.
Yeah, and it looks like a really sharp gradient of rain right along the extreme Outer Banks, and even they probably won't see a ton of rain like we're used to seeing in a more landfall type case. The real story for the Outer Banks is going to be these these gusty winds, but the Outer Banks are kind of used to the gusty winds. They get out a lot, so I don't know that is necessarily the big take home for Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's going to be the coastal erosion, the loss of the dune system in places, and then the water in surge and waves sort of punching through the dune system as it is compromised and flooding several areas along the Outer Banks.
So, Jamie, talk about farther north. For example, along Long Island, they've done a big beach restoration, multiple beach restorations, as a matter of fact, since Sandy,
Right.
which was the big turning point there. To what degree do you expect that the energy from this storm is going to impact the Jersey Shore, Long Island? They're all vulnerable areas with a sandy beach, obviously.
Yeah, this is going to be sort of a case, sort of like a real estate, location, location, location. So in places where the dunes are strengthened and strong, they're going to hold back the surge in most cases. And in situations where the dunes have been eroded or compromised, you could get water to punch through. So the overall surge numbers won't be very high, up that far north. But in places where the water can push through the dune system, you are going to get impacts, and that's one of the things we're working on now. That part of the message. So if you walk out on the floor now, that's what they're working on, because we tend to do watches and warnings with a set lead time. So just because there's nothing sort of north of where there's watches and warnings now, that doesn't mean there's no impacts. It just means from a lead time, we're sort of working from south to north up the coastline.
Well, and they're going to have also multiple high tide cycles along the coast there. And so, as anybody that's spent time on the Jersey Shore or on the coast of Long Island or other, even Delmarva, knows that when you get big waves, powerful waves over an extended period of time, you get escarpments where you get these shelves and part of the beach is washed away and that kind of thing. I would think that in some areas, at least, we would expect that in a situation like this, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and it'll be in spots, so it won't be like widespread. The Outer Banks are probably going to take the worst of the the brunt of the storm in terms of coastal flooding, but there will be problems to the north. We're still sort of refining that component of the messaging, so I think we'll have more to say later, tonight and tomorrow in terms of defining that.
Yeah, because that's more farther north is more a Thursday.
Correct. Yeah.
Story, right. Okay. All right, Jordan.
Yeah, so the next one is kind of about the forecast and in particular. The question is, why do hurricanes bomb out and get bigger? Which we know it's more of deepening, but I think there's more to that of like, there's some question of why is it so big? Aaron seems very big. When you look at a satellite image, it looks very scary, dangerous. Why is Aaron so big, and why is it going to get larger?
So it is big, and I've been reminding people of is Ike being a Category 2 storm and wiping out the Bolivar Peninsula near Houston at Category 2. That was in the Gulf, which is a very different thing than in the Atlantic, but it gives you an idea that just because it's Category 2, if it's big, it moves a lot of water. And of course, the supreme example of that is Sandy. Both Ike and Sandy made landfall, and that's a different thing than this non-landfalling storm. But again, bigness is very important. So Jamie, you want to take why do hurricanes bomb out and get bigger?
Yeah, so this is a somewhat traditional life cycle of a storm that becomes a major hurricane. It goes up really, really quickly. So it became a Cat 5, pretty much in the blink of an eye, and it was a small storm. And then it went through these structural changes, what we call eye wall replacement cycles. You've heard these terms probably before. And what happens is an outer eye wall forms around the inner eye wall. The inner one basically collapses, the inner eye wall collapses, and you're left with the outer sort of eye wall. Well, that, by virtue of how it works, makes the storm bigger, right? Bigger, but weaker. And that's sort of what happened in this case. The other thing that's happening as it gains latitude or moves north, it begins to interact with high pressure systems and it's sort of shoving. Remember, you got a low pressure system sort of banging into a high pressure system that creates a pressure gradient, which expands the wind field out. So those two things are contributing to this, growth in size as it approaches the mid-Atlantic.
Also, I mean, we have some people that are real meteorologists on these Q&As, I'll tell you, just based on the questions. Also, the Coriolis force increases as it goes north, right? So the spinning of the Earth
Right.
has a bigger effect, gets more air turning, essentially. So storms grow by
They naturally grow as they move
they just
north.
naturally grow as they move to the north. So yes, all those factors come into play.
So let's talk a little about the travel impacts. So we got a lot of people on cruises. This person, Jay Harris, we're leaving on a cruise tomorrow to Port Canaveral. We're set to depart port at 8. Think we will miss most of the waves. They are headed south.
Well, so Port Canaveral is not really out of it. I mean, right? Because we get way south down here in South Florida, where Jamie and I are, the Bahama Bank or the Bahamas kind of blocks the wave energy down here. But from about the Treasure Coast or Palm Beach County north, northern Palm Beach County north, there is pretty good wave energy out there. But the cruise ships know what they're doing, right? I mean, you've had significant interaction, I imagine, with those companies over the years.
Yeah, I mean, one of the little known facts about the Hurricane Center is we have a standalone marine unit. So a unit that focuses on just forecasting the conditions at sea for cruise ships and cruise companies and other, ocean going vessels. So it's hard to know whether or not, a particular trip would be canceled. My guess is maybe the route gets altered for, they may have to speed up or slow down or take a different route to, for safety or comfort reasons, to get out of these large waves that are coming down. But my best recommendation is, stay in contact with the cruise company and maybe pack some motion sickness medicine, because it could be a bumpy ride depending on where your particular route is taking you.
Well, they said they're going south, which of course is good, but I can imagine if you get a lot of energy coming into the port, just getting the ship in and out of the port could be
Right.
dicey. But anyway, they're not going to do anything unsafe. So
Right.
if they don't feel like they can do it with ultimate safety, they're not taking the ship out of the port. So, but yes, good advice. Stay in touch with your cruise line.
All right, the SMB channel. What's your expectation from Myrtle Beach for this week? My wife and I will be heading there Wednesday night. Thank you for all your hard work.
All right. Well, Myrtle Beach is sort of on the edge of it. The way the coast slopes back a little bit, right there, they won't get the brunt. But you've got still a noticeable storm surge in Myrtle Beach. I don't think a damaging surge. What would you expect there? Pretty big waves, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be unsafe to get in the water. So whatever you do, so whether you go on the trip or not, it's a personal decision. But don't get in the water when it's unsafe. And some people, it's sort of tricky. These rip currents are sort of tricky. They like to get in just a little bit. So you see a lot of rip current situations where people sort of acknowledge that the wave action looks unsafe. So they only go into like their waist deep, thinking that it's okay. Even that can be unsafe. These rip currents can just pull your feet right out from underneath you. Now, I mean, if the beaches often have the flags out to tell you whether or not it's safe. So always check that. If you don't know, you can always go up to a lifeguard stand and just ask them, is it, safe to get in the water? Just kind of be smart about, what you're doing, and the rip current risk may linger, beyond when the storm itself pulls away. So, from a sort of sensible weather perspective, meaning you look up, it's clear, the skies are blue. It may feel safe from, like a traditional weather perspective. But if you're not sure, just check those local beach conditions and make sure that the rip current risk has come down.
Yeah, this is a situation where the wind is a different phenomena than the energy, the swells coming out of the storm. The swells kind of radiate from the storm. The wind circulates around the storm, right? So it can kind of fool you. And having grown up along the Florida coast, I can tell you, having experienced that. I mean, the advice that we give is don't go into the water above your ankles. Like walk along the beach, that's fine. But it is stunning how strong the currents are, rip currents and other currents, just the undertows and things like that. It really is. And how strong the waves are, having experienced this on a surfboard and trying to paddle through a wave where we used to grab the surfboard and like turtle through the wave is what we called it. But the wave was like cement. I mean, the power behind the wave, it's a whole different thing when it's powered by a hurricane. So anyway, that's the good advice that we've been giving as well.
A little bit of a more in-depth question, sciencey. You know, all the models have Aaron turning north and northwest, but why? Why did it steadily go west-northwest for thousands of miles and then suddenly turn north?
Well, yeah, they generally do that, right? The hurricane wants to turn north. It always wants to turn north, and that's got to do with the spinning of the Earth. But and high pressure holds it south. If it's going to stay south, it's high pressure holds it south, and in this case, it drives around the end of the high pressure system. But this is the question, I guess, with all the forecasts that you guys make, right? Is to what degree at some point it's going to turn north. To what degree will the high weaken, the end of the high weaken? And in this case, we have seen a slow migration to the west of the tracks, not dramatic and certainly within the cone. That's why the cone has width, right? But describe what the process is for evaluating that whole issue of when is it going to turn and the angle of turning, and how you look at all those different models and come up with, I mean, the key word is consensus, I guess, but how does that work?
It's a great question, and it's certainly, probably the biggest question out there now that sort of models are like freely available, and you can open up any social media and see them everywhere. And there's this conventional thought process that the forecaster just looks and says that one, that model, that line. And you see this sort of playing out on social media where you got people saying, well, I think this model is going to be best because it was best last time, or it was best yesterday. You see that sort of narrative, but that's not how we forecast at all. Not even close. The forecasters have a number of tools to blend the models together to form what we call a consensus. And consensus in this case is very similar to how consensus would be used in plain language. If you had 10 people giving you an opinion on how to do something, what's the consensus of those 10? And then some people assume it's just sort of a mathematical average, which is still an oversimplification of the process. And so, we have tools to look back in time at how the models perform in different situations or in different parts of the basin and whatever, and sort of blend them together with a weighting function, if you will, sort of a smart consensus. And then the forecasters apply their own conventional wisdom to the process themselves. And here's a fun fact that, the Hurricane Center is often, I don't want to use the word criticized, but sort of tied to this notion that we're this old, stodgy, won't change, slow, this sort of thing. It turns out that adherence to consistency, if you will, is one of many ways, one of the many mechanisms that enable us to beat the models, the traditional individual models, right? And so there's just a lot that goes into it, more than I'm just going to pick a line off a map and say that one. But it's a really good question, especially now that models are kind of out there.
Yeah, and now we have the AI models and so forth. And one way that I think that folks don't appreciate how looking at the cone or looking at the National Hurricane Center forecast really is the best way to get the forecast in your mind is imagine if they didn't have this motto of consistency and the cone jumped in for your town and you were out of the cone, in the cone, and it jumped back and forth. Would that not be very confusing? So they don't do that from experience and from a communication standpoint, because you want people to understand their risk. And the in or out of the cone thing is, it doesn't say anything about your risk. That little bit is in the noise. So there's a lot of experience that goes into making those kinds of decisions. When you're talking about the corrected consensus, right? The modern way of doing a consensus that isn't just averaging models. Although the averaging models would, when you look online, it's called TVCA. We just call it consensus. Is amazingly good.
It
And
works
it's a
well.
smart average, but it's not
Right.
just always exactly the same average, but it does work very well. Yeah.
It tends to be a relatively good baseline for skill. So if you're measuring
Right.
the skillfulness of an approach or a model or a forecast, yeah, that's sort of a baseline of whether you can or can't beat it.
Right, and that's the goal, is to beat that we've had around for a while. All right, Jordan.
Yeah, so in kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, on TikTok we have some questions about AI. There was a mention of, or a question about the NHC used or mentioned AI in a forecast discussion for Aaron. So the question is, how much are you guys using AI models this year? And Brian, you've done a lot with that as well.
Yeah, so I know that we incorporate in our discussions the Google and the European Center AI model called the AIFS. It's not to discount the others, but we found those have some credibility. And I know at the Hurricane Center, you guys are consulting at least the Google AI model, if not the others. What is the status of that in the forecast process now that we've had a few storms under our belt?
Well, there's kind of two forms of AI. So let's start first with the historical version of AI, which is anything where a machine is learning and evolving. And so we've been using those techniques at the Hurricane Center. Gosh, we were using them back when I was a hurricane forecaster. So this sort of concept, what is commonly called AI now, has been around for a while. It's been used at the Hurricane Center. Our forecasters are quite comfortable with that sort of relationship with the process. But I think the question was more framed in a more modern use of AI, which is an AI model, meaning a model is trying to do what a traditional numerical weather prediction model would do. And there's several of those out there. And some of them look like they may add value to the forecast process. They're currently undergoing evaluation. And the Hurricane Center has a very, very rigorous and disciplined process. So, we don't take one forecast or one storm and declare success with a particular tool. We want to see how it performs over the course of time. Many storms, many forecasts, many different types of storms, different parts of the basins, and what have you. And that's ongoing now. So it's sort of too early to say, whether, which tool is best, or, what contribution they may or may not have to the forecast process. But I will say this, the early indications are positive. They're going to make a positive contribution to the forecast process. It's just, how much of a contribution are they going to make is what remains to be determined.
And this is the first year. And for example, would they add the consensus at some point? I know there's evaluation going on of that. Some early news seemed to be positive, but anyway, we're just stepping into the water slightly here in terms of experiencing these. So that's why we're showing them, really to experience them, so that we can understand better to what degree they enhance what we think might happen.
All right, so the next thing is a couple of things here. First of all, Casper asked us, with an abnormally wide wind field and extreme turnover of the waters, could we see a larger area of cooler waters in Aaron's wake? And the second part of that, I have a lot of people on TikTok that are asking about the newly tagged 99L by the Hurricane Center. What's the impact, right? We have Aaron going through the cooler waters. Now, what are we thinking about 99L?
So let me answer the first one, unless you're going to disagree with me. I think the answer is yes, that the more you stir up the ocean, the more likely you are to get cool water in a wake. And indeed, the one that is not an invest, that looks like it may eventually turn north, although the models are all over the place. Um, might experience some of that cooler water if it does indeed follow Aaron, at least in part of the track. Any disagreement there? And what do you think about the 99L situation?
Yeah, I mean, you can already see it showing up in the ocean temperatures, and it'll show up even more as time marches on, both because it's churning up more water and because you're getting more data to come in to reflect that sort of cool wake that almost all hurricanes leave behind. And then whether the next storm will move over that wake. So let's say hypothetically it does move over that wake, then clearly it's going to have some sort of impact on limiting the developmental potential because there's less heat or energy to tap into. It remains to be seen what system comes in behind it. In the exact path would be determined whether it forms early or late. So typically the earlier they form, the more they want to turn to the north. The later they form, they can make it more west. So let's say it did form and it formed later, then it would be more of a westward track versus the track that Aaron has taken.
Well, yeah, and there's two systems down there. The one that you have the big development area on the 60% development area that looks like it's going to get too near to the islands. Whether it's developed into anything by that time is an open question, I guess. But there's a really strong cold front coming down, fall cold front, and a big dip in the jet stream coming down to the eastern part of the U.S., which is going to keep things away from the U.S. coast at some point when it gets to the coast, and at least for a while. So how all these pieces are going to interact. And my sense is that there's still a lot of dry air in the tropics. Does it, I haven't looked at a metric lately, but does it seem unusually dry for the 19th of August to you?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little on the dry side. I mean, the tropics are dry all the time. So there's dry versus moist is like a relative in the
Right.
tropics. But it's you would normally, and this is probably one of the things that has contributed to the season not really cranking. Like it's busy, but it's not really cranking up yet. And this is also one of the reasons why. And Bryan, you're going to appreciate this. These long range predictions or models that you see people throwing around almost recklessly on social media. There's no predictability. There is no predictability at all at those lead times. I mean, anybody who does this seriously for a living knows that, and knows that there's not much of a signal there. But the reason there is no predictability is not that the models or the tools are inaccurate or deficient. It's because all these forces, like you talked about, the cold front and the trough and the dry air and the wake of the hurricane, all of these things are sort of moving around in time and space, and getting the exact sequence is hard enough 5 days in advance and pretty much impossible 10 days in advance.
Jamie, the new advisory just came in, I see. Jordan, you want to just punch it up? Not that there's a whole lot to see. 105 miles per hour is what the top winds are still, and moving north-northwest at 10. And maybe Jamie, or any new, let me look it up here, and let's just, since folks are tuned in, this is like the real thing here.
Yeah, I know a guy.
So what are the new watches and warnings? The tropical storm
like
watch
the tropical
extended
storm
north.
watch is extended northward.
Yeah, to Chincoteague, Virginia, and a tropical storm watch for Bermuda.
Right.
Otherwise, the other watches and warnings are still in effect. And I take it we're working on the cone graphic, but I take it the cone is still on track. We haven't had a hurricane hunter in since earlier, before the 2 o'clock advisory, right? So we'll have one before the 8 p.m. advisory tonight to see what that big blow up of thunderstorms that's going on here. If there's anything going on, and we see it actually seems to be waning a little bit. But we'll see what they have to say when they go out there and look at that in detail. Any other thoughts about the advisory?
I mean, I think the expansion of the tropical headlines northward, wind headlines northward, is probably the biggest take home, because that puts port. I alluded to this earlier, or I said we were working on it as we speak. This deciding how far north to go with the watches to try to highlight where the biggest impacts are going to be.
So this tropical storm watch is all about the wind. This is not related to storm surge or waves or anything else. Those are a whole separate thing, and no change on the storm surge forecast. But all the waves and the high wave forecast and the beach warnings and all that are done by the National Weather Service offices locally. So all along the coast, you need to be aware of your local forecast there.
All right.
All right, Jordan, what else do we have from folks watching this afternoon?
Yeah, so we have a question here from Myrtle Beach, just north of Myrtle. Have to worry about any wind and rain with the new advisory, the expansion of the watches. Maybe we can talk about that area.
All right, Jamie, you want to? I mean, I don't think there's going to be much wind and rain to really worry about, right? This is more a beach danger issue for Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be a little blustery, Wednesday and maybe early Thursday for Myrtle Beach, but nothing out of the norm, nothing,
Nothing
too
crazy.
big.
Yeah.
Right. The big take home, especially for the edges. So, places that, get the hardest surge, I think there's going to be so much wave action that any reasonable person is going to know not to get in the water. But on the edges, it may not be intuitive to a person not to get in the water. Like there may not be traditional visual clues to not get in the water. So I would say Myrtle Beach and other places all along the East Coast, Eastern Seaboard, practically all the way down to Palm Beach, Florida, need to exercise caution about getting in the water for the next several days due to these rip currents.
Yeah, swim where there are lifeguards and pay attention to what they're warning locally. Also, the wind is going to come from the northeast. This is like an ultimate nor'easter kind of a situation. So because of the way the coastline slopes back there in North Carolina, you're not getting the direct off the ocean northeast wind like north of Cape Hatteras, where you get a more direct ocean wind, which is always stronger, of course. All right, Jordan?
Yeah, so next question here from the New York City. All NYC beaches are closed to swimmers starting tomorrow. So maybe talking about the impacts and why all those beaches are closed.
Yeah, that's that energy that is spreading out, right? It's going to start tomorrow and peak on Thursday, I think, in New York and Long Island, the Jersey Shore, and but noticeable. Obviously, they're not taking any chances.
I saw this earlier. It started, I think, yesterday with like New Jersey beaches were proactively closing, which you don't traditionally see this time of year. And at least the New Jersey beach that I was inquiring about, it's the first time they had closed it proactively since Sandy, to sort of put it in perspective. This is really encouraging. This means that the big push and rip current forecasting and awareness that the Weather Service has initiated over the last couple of years, and the Hurricane Center joined that push this season. And Bryan, you saw this, that the rip current messaging has been hard. It came early. It's been consistent. I mean, we've just been hammering away on the rip current, and to see these local communities do what I argue is making the right decision is just really, really encouraging. And that action is probably going to save untold lives by preventing people from getting in the water.
It's amazing how many people die in rip currents. Even here in South Florida, where the ocean is relatively calm. I mean, compared to these other places, right? Because we have the Bahamas out there protecting us from the big swells and so forth. But it's just tragic how many tourists come down here and they want to go in the ocean. They don't have ocean experience. and they don't recognize what they're getting into, and they don't know what to do instinctively. If and most people don't, if they get caught in a rip current, to swim parallel to the beach, and you're out of it pretty quickly. But it is really, it's just such a tragedy, and it's fantastic that the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center now are really highlighting that risk, because the hurricane could be way away from the location where the rip current risk is enhanced by the storm. And this storm, I guess, is kind of an ultimate example of that.
This is a textbook case of a rip current case. And just to put it in perspective, because a lot of people, even though we're talking about it, they can't, like, what do you mean rip currents are, so rip currents, so we track mortality at the Hurricane Center because it helps us with messaging and policy decisions. And storm surge mortality has been declining rather briskly. And so now rip currents have overtaken storm surge in terms of cause of deaths in these types of systems.
So, Jordan, we have the new cone there and the graphics, and here you can see what the new forecast is there, and you see it up to 110 miles per hour is the estimate. Indeed, this in some intensification, but also growth in size while it's over the warm water, and then the atmospherics are forecast to become more conducive as well. So in this period of time where it's still moving relatively slowly and it's putting all this energy, especially toward Cape Hatteras and the points north of there, that we're going to have a somewhat stronger storm and a growing storm. So certainly nothing in this advisory would indicate any less threat. The threats that we've been talking about are still in place all along the coast, as we've been talking about, from Palm Beach County north, but then especially around that Cape Hatteras Tidewater area, and then on up to, all the way Delmarva, Ocean City, Rehoboth, Jersey Shore, Long Island, Hamptons, Fire Island, and then on the New England coast, although the New England coast in general is not as vulnerable, although there are some beaches there that obviously the people do go swimming in the ocean, in spite of the fact it's too cold for me. But anyway, they do that anyway. All right, Jordan, what do you have?
So I got a question from Virginia Beach. Do you think tropical storm warnings will extend into Virginia Beach?
Mr. National Hurricane Center, what do you think?
Well, I mean, you're under a watch now, right? And so that's basically saying that tropical storm force conditions, winds are possible. And we issue those at a longer lead time than warnings because of the relative uncertainty. So it's not clear yet whether those would be upgraded to a warning, because that would occur, later tonight or tomorrow morning type of thing, when there's more certainty. So generally speaking, a forecast becomes more certain as you get closer to the onset of the weather or onset of the condition. So that's why the watch and the warning are staggered in time. The watch is, potential, and generally warning is, trying to imply a greater likelihood of occurrence.
So I'm just a little old broadcaster. So let me say that I would say on TV, it will probably be upgraded because the northeast wind is coming directly in there. So as the storm gets farther north, you're going to get a northeast wind. But in any case, need to be ready for gusty winds of tropical storm force, if not sustained winds. It's going to be quite breezy along the coast for sure.
Speaking of the northeast wind and the northerly winds, a question for Jonathan Lewis. With the northerly wind direction, are we expecting the Chesapeake Bay to have relatively normal tide heights? And I also think just for excellent coverage and not sensationalizing.
Oh, well, thank you, Jonathan. So my intuitive sense is that some of that energy is going to be pushing water into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. So the tide goes in, it can't quite come out, and just even with the wind, let alone the swells, the way this is going to move. What do you think, Jamie?
Oh, absolutely. You're going to have water problems in the Tidewater or Norfolk area because the northerly winds on the backside are basically going to want to simultaneously push the bay south, right, and push the ocean in, and you get a little bit of a collision going there. So there's going to be flooding problems, most likely in the areas that flood quite often. The residents there are pretty familiar because it floods several times a year, such as in the fall, in the big
The king
king
tides.
tides
Yeah.
and nor'easters or big winter events.
Right.
So we're probably looking at something that doesn't quite rise to the level of a storm surge warning, at least not with the information we have now, but certainly is going to rise to the level of taking precautionary measures. If you're in one of those flood prone areas, you kind of know where they are. And so, making sure that you're getting your car out of that area, making sure you're avoiding that area, or making sure that you're not putting yourself in a situation where you could be stuck, that sort of thing is really the actions at this point.
Yeah, parts of Norfolk have that problem, and there are other areas around Chesapeake Bay. Yes, but expect high water there at the very least.
All right, this one from Joe. Although forecast track areas have improved markedly in the past few decades, intensity forecasts seem challenging. Should marked improvement with intensity forecasting occur over the next 10 years?
So I remember, I don't know, a few years ago, there was a sense, okay, this is it. Well, the intensity forecasts are really leveled off, it feels like, for years. Yeah, they go up and down a little bit, but I mean, basically the same. But there really has been progress over the last few years in forecasting intensity. I mean, do we know yet if that's real progress or because we don't have that many hurricanes to really test the new science on. We have reason to think the new science is good, the higher resolution models and so forth, but what's the consensus thinking on that, Jamie?
I think we're at the leading edge of a big march and improvements in intensity, similar to the marches in track that people have seen over the last 10 or 15 years. We just haven't had enough storms to sort of bear it out and for people to see it, and because we're at the front edge of this sort of push. So the answer to the question, will there be improvements in intensity over the next 10 years? Absolutely. And if not, I'll be looking for another job. Yeah, I think you're going to see a really impressive improvement in intensity forecasting. And then the next frontier after that is structure, getting the structure of the storm or the size right, because that's really important for determining what you, the citizen, experience at home. Okay, so the track and intensity are metrics, but they don't really tell you much about sort of your user experience at home. What's it going to be like at your house? Getting the structure right, or the size of the wind field, and is really going to help us to pinpoint what a community could experience in terms of impacts.
Yeah, look at the Charlie versus Ian comparison, same wind speed, but very different structured storm. And it's also going to be really interesting with the new AI models as we gather more detailed information about the storms, the core of the storms, and they put that into the AI model. Then the AI model has more to compare the current situation to. And obviously, that's one of the key things that AI models do. They also kind of deduce in some kind of scary way. But there's a lot of comparing going on, and it takes data to compare. So high resolution data inside the core of the storm. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the AI models that are designed to do that, like the Google DeepMind model, that's what they're trying to do. As they get more data, in theory, if that science is working right, in theory, it will yield better forecasts in the future, along with the traditional models as well. So it's an interesting time, but it takes data gathering to really make those advances, as well as the scientific work.
All right, a question from TikTok. Is Southeast Virginia safe? Should we be considering voluntary evacuations?
So that's a personal choice, but I think this, as you said, based on experience, Jamie.
Yeah, so and maybe people don't know this. Evacuations are, typically ordered by local officials. They'll be taking a look at the latest information and making that determination. And then, as Bryan said, if they don't make an evacuation determination, then it's a personal decision. But if they do, I would recommend heeding those instructions, because it's often based off a number of factors that may not be immediately evident just looking at a cone or just looking at models.
Yeah, so I mean, you evacuate for multiple reasons. A big reason, of course, is that you might get flooded and so forth, and it's in a dangerous way. Then the other one is, and a big one is that you might get cut off. So a big part of evacuating is your own personal vulnerability, is people that are electricity dependent and live in a place that traditionally floods and so forth. Sometimes you just need to use good sense to think, okay, I'm in a vulnerable place. I'm a vulnerable person. I should maybe take care of myself and just to be sure, go stay with a friend just to be sure, even if they don't order an evacuation. But they're going to err on the side of not getting anybody caught stranded or in a bad way when the storm comes by.
All right, this one coming in from Craig. When you say an 80-mile hurricane wind field, is that the diameter or the radius?
So yeah, that's a little. I make that confusing. Anybody that signs up for my or looks at my hurricane intel stuff. So what I do is I take the the biggest diameter and say, okay, that's the maximum diameter. We call it the maximum diameter. But so when you put out you do it by quadrants in the advisory. So describe how that the quadrant sizes work.
Yeah, and it's a really good question because different people explain it different ways, and sometimes they're a little bit sloppy with the wording so that it's not clear whether we're talking about, how far out from the center or how far across. So it's a really valid question. The way the hurricane does it is we generally measure from the center. So we could say tropical storm force winds extend out up to what number of miles, 200 miles, whatever the number is. Hurricane force winds extend out such and such of miles. And then some people like to try to double that number to create the diameter, but those winds might not extend out in the same direction, the same distance in all directions. And so that leads to a relatively, I would call it sloppy sometimes, a characterization of the size of the storm. I've also seen people look at the satellite sort of canopy and sort of measure across, as a way of doing that. That's also a sloppy, because the cloud tops or what you're seeing in satellite don't necessarily reflect wind speed underneath. But if you're looking at the hurricane center forecast, we measure from the center out, or what you would call the radius.
Yeah, and another point of confusion is that there are four quadrants, right? Northeast, southeast, northwest, and southwest, and that's by not by the storm, but by the grid on the Earth, right? So if the storm is moving east to west, the different quadrants become it kind of might be the biggest quadrant. So what with Hurricane Intel, what we do is we look at northeast to southwest and southwest to northeast and look across it and see which one of those total numbers is the biggest for the max diameter, just because there isn't space to put all those different numbers. Anyway, but yes, it's an excellent question. But anyway, the Hurricane Center numbers are the quadrants of the compass from the center. And so you look at it in that way. And when you look at their map, where we had the yellow, we were looking at that earlier with the we color it yellow where there's tropical storm force winds and so forth. You can see that look at the hurricane winds there in the center, and what you see there is that it's not round, right? The center of the storm is not in the center of the hurricane force winds because the system is not symmetric, and that's why the hurricane center provides those various quadrant dimensions in their advisory.
All right. Next one, a little bit of a question about the hurricane hunters. I saw the beautiful video of the recon inside the eye. That video, of course, went viral over the weekend. My quirky question is, can you escape out of the storm through the top of the eye?
Well, okay. Go ahead, Jamie. The answer would be they don't do that, but okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been asked that question
No,
in
I don't
my
think so
career.
either.
So you win the prize for that. The short answer is no. When you're seeing that high up in the atmosphere, you're at the top you're beyond the limits of what aircraft can fly at, right? So to climb that high, to get out of it
You
is
take a pretty special airplane to go that high. Yeah.
You're right. So most aircraft are capped sort of in the 35 to 40,000 foot range. Obviously, some specialized aircraft can get above that. And when you're looking at the top of a hurricane, you're probably, gosh, I haven't done this in a while, maybe 50,000 plus feet. And so you're kind of above the limits of what a normal aircraft can fly at. So no, that's not done that way.
Yeah, they don't fly Concords at all anymore, and they certainly don't fly them into hurricanes, supersonic jets that I don't remember now what they 50 some thousand feet, I think the Concords flew at, right, when they flew. All right, Jordan.
All right, the next question. What do you think the strongest wind gusts are going to be from Aaron in North Carolina?
So we've been advertising 50 to 60 miles per hour. Well, do you calculate that out, or you just say tropical storm warning? Do you guys look at specific numbers?
Yeah, so gust is one of the new sort of areas we're looking at, because gust is one of those things that is the real user experience. Like how you feel the storm and what damage you have is a function of gust. Whereas traditionally we have forecast and communicated sustained or sort of more average wind speeds, if you will. So while we don't explicitly produce gust forecast right now, that's one of the areas that we're sort of working towards in the future. But I mean, Bryan's earlier range is well within a reasonable forecast at this stage of the game.
Yeah, the gust thing, I mean, obviously, a lot of us here in South Florida experienced Hurricane Andrew, and I can tell you that every person that talked to me after Hurricane Andrew and described when their house came apart or when something failed described a gust. They never described the sustained wind. And if you think about it, if you really want to get in a door that's locked, you don't lean on it. You haul back and hit it with something, right? And so that's what a gust is. It's a surge. So really, when you're talking about extreme weather, gusts are better information, although we'd have to tune our minds to the numbers that are involved in gusts. But gusts are really better information. And now we know a lot more about it. We used to use just a multiplier, right? I used to say, okay, 1.3 times the sustained wind, that's the gust, right? Or that technically it should have been 1.4, I guess, even back then. But now we know that sometimes the gusts are a lot more than that, and sometimes they're less than that, depending on other factors in the storm. So this is a good move to. A lot of it came out of Helene last year, right? What happened in Georgia and in Augusta, way inland in Georgia, where the gusts were so high, but the sustained winds were about what you'd expect.
Yeah, there's an old quote, and Bryan, you're a history guy. I went back. The peak damage is done by the peak wind, no matter how long it blows. It's traditionally attributed to Fujita, a famous researcher, and the work of tornado damage. But that really succinctly sort of says that whether your roof is damaged or what a tree falls down or what have you, generally speaking, is a function of the gust, which are higher than the sustain. But because we've had limited tools for predicting the gust, up until the last couple of years, we've stuck with the more traditional sustain. Now, as we start to develop the capability to forecast and communicate gusts, we have to do it carefully because, like you said, the calibration, everybody's so sort of tuned to these traditional ways of communicating. So we'll have to look at the social science side of that to see what's sort of the best way to take that next step.
Yeah, when if you think about it though, just think about what it takes to break a tree limb. It's not the sustained wind, right? It's the boom gust, and it gets the thing swinging, and then the gust finally breaks it. So the gusts are where the action is, but and and over time, um, it's sort of worked out because generally, if the storm is a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane and it's offshore, and the gusts over land are probably in that range because the sustained winds, as soon as the air hits the land, are less, and the gust factor goes up over the land. So it's kind of worked out, right? That how strong was Ian when it came ashore? Well, it was 150 something. Well, not over most of Southwest Florida. Over most of Southwest Florida, over the land, it was significantly less, but the gusts were higher. So
Right.
right, and so the numbers have sort of, if you blur your eyes, worked out in terms of people understanding what they got hit with. But they
Yeah,
got
and
hit with
you can
gusts.
convince yourself of this. So one of the narratives that often forms after a hurricane, people see the wind observations, and that other than those who experience it, they're relatively disappointed in the wind observations, right?
Right,
They're like, "Where's the wind? Where's the
right.
wind? You were saying Cat 4, and there's only Cat 2 winds." But if you look at the gust, you end up with a more sort of, like you said, kind of worked itself out.
Yeah, what you'd expect. Yeah,
Right,
the number you were hoping for.
right.
Since your house got damaged or your tree fell down or whatever. Yeah, no, it does kind of work out that way. Jordan?
All right, next question, and I pulled up the wave graphic for you, Brian. If you want to get into it, from Edward, I scuba dive in the Northeast. Typically, how long for the swells and currents to settle down, and how long for the water to clear up after all that churning?
Yeah, not this week. I don't know. Is there any kind of rule of thumb on that? I have no idea. I mean, the model says that there's still going to be a lot of energy in the water all the way once the storm is gone, even into the weekend.
Well, this gentleman's after my own heart, so I love to free dive, and it's lobster season here in South Florida.
Oh, it is. That's
So
right.
I will be anxious to see when the visibility starts to settle down. But as people who dive and free dive know, visibility can be very, very difficult to predict. So I would think the wave energy itself, so the surface waves, would settle down, this weekend. But how quickly the visibility improves is I couldn't wager a guess at that.
Yeah, I don't even know exactly what makes in the deep ocean, what makes the visibility an issue. I imagine near shore, you have all these waves and sand and whatnot get in the water and stirs things up, and the bottom gets stirred up and so forth. But and I imagine when you're diving, you're not diving out in the depths of the Mariana Trench or something. But so I don't know. I don't know the science of this. And would this affect the visibility down here, like in the Keys? Where is that where the
I would
lobsters
think in
are?
the Keys, but so as the storm gets more you talked about earlier about us being South Florida being blocked, and that's mostly true. But some of that swell can sort of leak
Right.
down the Florida East Coast between us and the Bahamas. There might be a little bit of north swell as the storm's up north. It kind of shoots down, and that could stir up the ocean a little bit, later in the week.
Yeah, around here. Yeah, once the flow is from the north and the storm is kind of passed. What you got,
All
Jordan?
right, yeah. So this one from Extreme Dirt Racing is the first hurricane of the season. Any indication on the hurricane season to come for that year?
So I guess the answer to that is no. I mean, we are really sort of on schedule, right? The first hurricane is normally normally on the 11th of August, if you look at the 30-year average from 1991 to 2020. And the tropical storms are nominally average, but I don't know. That doesn't really tell us anything about late September or October, does it?
No, no. I mean, this hurricane about this time in August is pretty typical. Pretty typical start of this, not start of the season, but a pretty typical evolution into the peak of hurricane season.
Now, it is going to be interesting with this strong cold front coming, and we'll see what happens with these two systems that the Hurricane Center is taking note of at the moment. The models are not especially excited, although one may get named because of dry air and strong easterly jet going across the kind of tropical belt down there, the main development region. So we'll see if things don't keep going at a pace. They don't have to go like gangbusters, but if they don't keep going, then I guess maybe that's just more like what people forecast, including NOAA and CSU, of essentially a normal season or a slightly above normal season. We wouldn't
Yeah, I
expect
mean,
everything to kick off, if
right.
you're
I
going to
mean,
have a normal season.
yeah. So I mean, it's hard to predict how the season will evolve. You've seen them start slow, end fast,
Yeah.
start fast, pause, and pick back up. I mean, every season has sort of a different personality, if you
Right.
will. And so you really don't know that personality until the end of the season,
Yeah.
right? You can kind of guess. It's sort of like if you met somebody for the first time and you tried to guess their personality within the first 5 minutes, right? There are some things you might be able to say, like they're outgoing or that sort of thing, but you really got to take time to get to know the person to see the depths of their personality, and it takes the whole season really to unfold to kind of you know determine how it's going to be.
Yeah, because there's nothing steady state about this. The weather pattern changes, but also we don't know exactly what's going on in the Pacific and whether we're going to end up with a La Nina late in the season once again, which can enhance the potential for storms in the second half of the hurricane season or after the peak. Anyway,
It's
all right,
interesting that you
Jordan, let's do a
mentioned.
couple more here, and then I guess we'll wrap it up for today.
You got it. So funny that you mentioned El Nino and Pacific. We just got a question of, are we in an El Nino or La Nina?
So we're heading we're La Nina light, I guess. I mean, we're not official, right? Because it takes 3 months of the temperature being cool, but it's right on the edge. The last I looked, so cool neutral, I think, is still the official term for the situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I sort of, to put this in terms that maybe people more used to, it's sort of a jump ball, if you will,
Mhm.
at this point, which means other factors come into play in terms of determining, is the season going to be active or inactive? And this is where it gets tricky to forecast, because you can have, in these jump ball sort of seasons, it can go either way. It could be relatively inactive, or it can be really, really active. And if you look back historically, you've got, both situations typically happen. And so that's why the season, that's why you hear Bryan and I sort of saying we can't really say how the rest of the season is going to go, because, it really is based off some of these other factors, which we can't necessarily predict more than, say, a week in advance, like the dry air, these fronts. We can't predict those things more than a week or so out into the future. So it's impossible to know how the season's going to end.
Yeah, if you look historically at these neutral seasons, it's about 50-50, whether they're, uh, have a lot of storms or few storms or whatever. So that's not really indicative. But if it does go toward a La Nina, which it's much more likely to do that than go to an El Nino, which would inhibit hurricanes to some degree. Uh, that's what the NOAA forecast is. If it does something, it would be more likely to go to a La Nina, which could produce more conducive conditions later on in the hurricane season. All right, Jordan, you got a good one to
Yeah, it's a
wrap
great
us
one
up
to
here?
kind of wrap it up. When will the next update be? What's next? So there's a good way to wrap it up right there.
I guess they mean the next Q&A. Well, we've been doing this. We didn't necessarily intend, honestly, to do this every week, but we've been doing it every week, and people keep reacting to it. So I think that's a good thing. And Jamie, it has been fabulous having you on here. And I think this is, in my mind, like I said when we started this is the modern way to do what we did back in the day, that we really did interact with people. And now that people don't like to talk on the phone anymore, they much prefer to type on their phone or to type on the computer. This is good, but I think this is great.
Yeah, and really appreciate you guys giving us the chance to get on here, get our message out, let people see the faces behind the hurricane center. It tends to be like this faceless bureaucratic thing, and there's people making the forecast, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be here and get our message out.
Yeah, people making hard decisions. I can tell you that they ask me all the time, "What's the Hurricane Center going to do?" I go, "Boy, am I glad I'm not making that decision uh, based on information that's 4951." I mean, it's finding where the line is really tough. All right, Jamie Rome, the deputy director of the National Hurricane Center and storm surge expert, and a really very important guy at the National Hurricane Center. Appreciate the time and appreciate all of you for tuning in here this afternoon and contributing your questions. And I imagine we'll be back next week. This is our first go around at all this, but it seems to have worked really well. So we'll see you on Fox Weather. In fact, I'll be on with Ian Oliver here in just a moment. We'll go over the 5 p.m. advisory and, of course, have full coverage here as long as Aaron is a threat. So, all right, have a good evening, everybody, and thanks a lot, Jamie. Good to see you.
Thank you.